Korean War, the causes of the conflict. The Japanese ruled over the unified kingdom from 1910 until 1945, in which they forbid the Korean language and de-emphasized Korean history in favor of Japanese culture. Japan surrendered to the Allies after the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, so the Korean peninsula was distributed between the USSR and USA. The USSR and USA divided it at the 38th parallel, and the Soviets got the north and imposed a communist government, and the US helped establish a military government in the south. In 1948, the UN sponsored a vote for South Koreans to determine their future government. The North refused to participate, and the South formed its government in Seoul under the anti-communist Syngman Rhee. In retaliation, Kim Il-sung, a former communist guerrilla, was named Premier of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Between 1949 and 1950, Kim Il-sung went to Moscow to seek Soviet support to invade South Korea. He was able to get Joseph Stalin to commit providing support for the invasion, and a verbal commitment from China. On June 25, 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea, and this was the outbreak of the war. Development of the war. On June 25, 1950, the Northern Korean People's Army invaded South Korea in a coordinated general attack at several strategic points along the 38th parallel. President Harry S. Truman committed United States air, ground, and naval forces to the combined UN forces assisting the Republic of Korea. The first several months were characterized by armies advancing and retreating up and down the Korean peninsula. On September 1950, General MacArthur surprised the North Koreans at Incheon, forcing them to retreat behind the parallel. On October 1950, the UN approved the movement of UN forces across the parallel into North Korea in an effort to unify the country under a non-communist government. The UN moved towards the Yalu River. In late October, MacArthur ordered to launch an offensive, and in late November, Chinese attacked in full strength, pushing the UNC in this area south of the North and South Korean border, with the communist forces seizing the South Korean capital, Seoul. In early 1951, the Chinese offensive lost momentum and the UNC retook Seoul and advanced back to the border. On July 1950, until the end of hostilities in the battle remained relatively stable and the conflict became stalemate. Truman administration abandoned plans to reunite North and South Korea, instead decided to pursue limit goals to avoid the possible escalation of the conflict into a Third World War. On December 2, 1952, Dwight D. Eisenhower visited the troops in South Korea. He sought an end to the hostilities in Korea through a combination of diplomacy and military muscle flexing. On July 27, 1953, the armistice was signed, ending organized combat operations and leaving the Korean peninsula divided. The consequences of the war were the division of Korea into two separate states along the 38th parallel, the North into a communist state under Kim Il-sung, and the South, a capitalist system under Syngman Rhee. Between 3 and 5 million soldiers and civilians were killed or wounded. It also increased Cold War hostilities between the US and the USSR. It started the nuclear arms race, the war-hate and fears of communist expansion, and contributed to the US decision to increase its nuclear arsenal. The US signed mutual defense pacts with South Korea and Japan to counter the perceived threat of communism. South Korea eventually modernized, and North Korea became isolated. Some featured characters and important people in this war were Kim Il-sung, who was the North Korean leader and who drove the invasion, Syngman Rhee, who was the South Korean president and anti-communist, General Douglas MacArthur, who led UN forces and was dismissed by Truman. Lastly, Mao Zedong, the Chinese leader who ordered intervention, and Joseph Stalin, the Soviet leader who supported North Korea.
The Suez Crisis. It starts when the President Gamal Abdel Nasser announced the nationalization of the Suez Canal, which had been under British and French control. A part of these two countries, Israel also had conflicts with Egypt. So it was a secret alliance between the United Kingdom, France, and Israel. The United Kingdom and France wanted to regain control on the canal, so Israel would invade Sinai, Sinai, and later the United Kingdom and France would intervene by bombing Egypt. But Egypt blocked the canal by sinking ships to prevent its uses, so there were intensive clashes in the canal zone and Egyptian port cities. After this, the United States and the Soviet Union condemned the British French intervention. The United Nations demanded a ceasefire and deployed a peacekeeping force. So, the United Kingdom, France, and Israel withdrew between December 1956 and January 1957.
The Berlin Wall. After the end of the World War II, Germany was divided into two parts, and Berlin was also divided into two parts, the zone led by the Western Allies and the zone led by the Soviet Union. In 1961, to prevent citizens of East Berlin from escaping to West Berlin, the government of the GDR built the Berlin Wall. This separated families, and they placed soldiers to ward them. The object my team and I chose was a baby carriage that smugglers used to transport their goods from one side to another without being caught, since they were not checked when crossing from one side to other. In 1989, due to political changes and popular pressure, the GDR government opened the borders, allowing people to cross, which led to the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Today I'm going to talk about the missile crisis. The causes of the missile crisis were the Cold War. The ideological and geopolitical competition between the two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, was the basis of the many global tensions. This rivalry directly influenced the perception of threat and confrontation in the crisis. 2. The Cuban Revolution. Fidel Castro's victory in Cuba, which overthrew the government of Fulgencio Batista, resulted in the establishment of a communist regime in the Caribbean, which was a critical point for the United States, which saw Cuba as key of ally in the Western Hemisphere. 3. The installation of Soviet missiles in Cuba. In 1962, the Soviet Union decided to install nuclear missiles in Cuba, which represented a direct threat to the United States, given the proximity of the island to the United States territory, approximately 145 kilometers from the coast of Florida. For the balance of nuclear power during this era, the nuclear arms race between the two superpowers was in full swing. The Soviets wanted to match American nuclear power, and by installing missiles in Cuba helped to improve their strategic position. Now I'm going to talk about the development of the missile crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis occurred in October 1962, when the United States discovered that the Soviet Union has installed the nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 150 kilometers from its territory. This sparked a tense confrontation between both countries, with the United States demanding the withdrawal and evacuating the island. After days of negotiation, an agreement was reached. The USSR would remove the missiles in exchange from United States not invading Cuba and removing its missiles. The crisis was resolved without war, but it increases the Cold War tensions. 2. The establishment of a red phone. Following the crisis, a daily line of communication was established between the United States President and the Soviet leader to avoid misunderstandings or escalations in future crises. These mechanisms helped prevent nuclear war in later situations. 3. The nuclear disarmament. The crisis motivated both powers to sign disarmament treaties, such as the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1963 and the Partial Nuclear Deadpoint Treaty of 1963, which helped reduce atmospheric nuclear testing. 4. The repercussions for Cuba. Cuba remained during the regime of Fidel Castro, who became a symbol of communist resistance in Latin America.
Now I'm gonna talk about the Arab-Israel conflict. So the first is the causes of this conflict. Territorial disputes and nationalism. The first was the Jewish nationalism, that is called Zionism, and then Arab and Palestinian nationalism. Also, the clash of national projects. Second, the fall of the Ottoman Empire. This empire collapsed after the First World War. 3. The creation of the State of Israel in 1948. The UN proposed to divide Palestine into a Jewish Arab state. Israel accepted this, but Arab states and Palestine didn't. So Israel declared independence, that it was the first Arab-Israel war. And finally, the Cold War and regional rivalries. So USA decided to support Israel, and the Soviet Union backed Arab states such as Egypt and Syria. And then there was a competition for leadership in the Arab world. Second, the war episodes. First, the Arab-Israeli War in 1948. The cause was the declaration of the State of Israel. Finally, Israel expanded its territory. Then the Suez Crisis. The cause was an Egyptian president nationalized the Suez Canal and blocked the Straits of Tiran. 3. The Six-Day War. The cause was the rising tensions. Israel was captured. 4. The Yom Kippur War. The cause was that Egypt and Syria sought to regain territories lost. And then the map was almost all the territory was for Palestine. But then Israel, that has a little territory, expanded for all Palestine. And Palestinians couldn't resist, so Israel managed to obtain all the territory from 1946 to 2012.